Do you ever feel stuck? The alarm goes off and you think, is this really my life? Do you wish you could douse your relationships or your career or even your business with rocket fuel and throw a match on it? End the blah once and for all. They either launch or they burn up and you get to start over. I've been there and I see you. I'm Ben Walters, an entrepreneur, pastor, coach, and consultant. If you're ready to get unstuck and ignite your super pumped life or business, I'll give you the rocket fuel and the match. All you have to do is light it. In today's episode, you'll learn how to crush your most important relationships. More specifically, I'll let you in on a game-changing secret that my grandma unexpectedly shared with me just before her death. So I was considering buying my first business, and that's a big life decision. And so I was mulling it over, and I'd called and I'd just asked my parents' opinion, and they gave me their opinion. And my wife and I were still mulling it over. We couldn't decide one way or the other. And then out of the blue, my phone rings, and it was my grandma. And first thing I thought was, wow, grandma knows how to use a cell phone. That's pretty cool. Second thing I thought, I wonder why grandma's calling, because she was getting way up there, right near the end of her life. And I hadn't heard a lot from her recently. And so she called me and she said, yeah, your mom told me that you were thinking about buying a business. And I said, yeah, we are. And she said, well, I want to share with you a story that I have never shared with you before, that I don't think you know about, because it happened back in the 1940s. And I said, wow, this sounds good. I want to hear this, Grandma. And she said, well, your grandpa and I had just gotten married. We were a young couple. We just had your mom. She was our oldest. And I saw an opportunity of ServiceMaster and ServiceMaster commercial cleaning businesses. And they were headquartered up in Chicago. And I was in Wabash, Indiana with your grandpa. And so I said, I think I want to go up there and hear more about that. And part of that was, both your grandfather and I had lived through the Great Depression. And I think I ate turnips every single meal and wore hand-me-down clothes and just really struggled and scraped to get by. And I thought, I can keep working a job, because she was telling me she was one of the original Rosie the Riveters. She worked in a factory as part of the war effort, like a lot of women did, but kind of the entry of women into the workforce. And so she said, I did that, but I'm making an hourly wage. I'm not making a great living. I'm never going to be comfortable with that. And Grandpa just came out of the Army. He was a high school dropout. So, he was limited in what he could do. And so I thought business ownership or entrepreneurship, that was the ticket. And so we went up to Chicago, your grandfather and I, and the idea was we would hear the pitch and then kind of make a decision if we wanted to go forward with this. And so we heard the pitch, and when the pitch was over, I was sold. She said, I was so excited. I thought, this ServiceMaster, this is a really good company. It aligns with our values, and there's always dirt, so you're always going to be able to find somebody to clean for. And she said, so we get out to the car, and I am jacked up about this. I am super excited. And we get in the car, and I say, what do you think, to my husband, Leo? And he says, nah, we're not going to do it. And she said, I was just completely crushed. I was deflated. I was like, here I was filled up. The balloon was about to pop with excitement. And he says, nah, I don't think it's a good idea. It's too big a risk. And so she said back then, she was a young wife, and I guess the societal relationships were a little bit different then. And so she didn't really want to raise her voice. And so she said, but inside it really just ate at me that he just kind of popped the bubble, popped the dream. And so we went back to Indiana, and we muddled for a few years. And then he had been stationed in Arizona in the Army. And so he loved his time out there. He loved the sunshine. He didn't have to shovel snow. It was just, things were booming out there at that time. So he said, I'd love to leave our families and go out to Arizona, which would have been a huge move. I mean, she was one of 8, he was one of 10, and it was leaving everything behind to go out there. But she said, I believed in him and I believed in us. And so I said, let's do it. And so they went out there. And from what my mom says, and this is interesting too, so this is kind of independently corroborated, she said, those were the happiest years of our lives. Those years when I was in grade school, living out in Arizona, my parents were in love. They were happy. They were really kind of in sync and firing on all cylinders. And as a family, when your parents are are aligned and loving and supportive and so forth. So they're out there, and my grandfather was a journeyman electrician, and when it was booming, they were booming, and when it was bust, it was bust. And so grandma, alongside that, always had a side hustle, even though she was predominantly a stay-at-home mom. And she had Avon, where she sold cosmetics, and was always trying to do something. She's very entrepreneurial. I think I learned a lot of my entrepreneurial skills from my grandma Sarton. And so she had this idea that she wanted to start a dress shop. And she went to my grandfather and said, I'd really like to start a dress shop. And you know what he said? True to form, just like years earlier, he said, no, I don't think it's a good idea. But this time my grandma was like, oh no, you're not gonna squash this. I'm going to do this one way or another. And so it created this huge rift in the marriage. And he said, well, you're not using any of our funds. And that really undermined her ability to launch this dress shop the way she wanted. But she wasn't going to be deterred by this. And so she thought, okay, how am I going to do this? Well, she kept selling Avon for a bit longer, and she kept sacking away all that money. And finally, she cobbled up enough money. She thought, okay, I can start a dress shop. But because she was limited by money, her dress shop, the only place she could afford who would take her on to lease commercial space, was a rundown area of South Phoenix. And so she was like, well, if that's what I can afford, that's what I'm going to do. And I'm so proud of her for taking that courageous leap. So she took her own money, none of the family money, and she started this dress shop. And she did well. Now, when I say she did well, it was limited because in retail, location matters a lot, and her location wasn't great. So she did well enough that she made some money, and she built up a clientele of people who even drove into a part of town that maybe wasn't the most desirable in order to buy her things. And people liked her style. People liked the way her shop was organized. It was a cool place, a cute place. But she knew it was limited. It was never going to be all that in that place. Well, about that time, malls came into be. This is in the 50s, maybe early 60s. Out in Arizona, there were two main malls that came in, the Metro Center Mall and the Thomas Mall. The Thomas Mall was just a couple of miles from their house in Scottsdale. And so she went to my grandfather and she said, look, the Thomas Mall is trying to lease space right now. They're being aggressive. He basically poured water on that dream. And this time, because she just didn't have enough resources, the amount of money the mall wanted up front from kind of an unproven commodity, and particularly a female entrepreneur at that time, she just didn't have the backing. She needed him to co-sign. She needed him to be on board in all ways. And unfortunately, he wasn't. And so this all happened long before I was born. But here's where I come into the story, and here's where I knew it. Their relationship, as I knew it, with all of us grandkids individually was great, but their relationship with one another was not great. It was contentious and rocky and combative, and it was not a storybook relationship. And none of us knew why, because we would do individual things with both of our grandparents. We would go, it sounds funny, but we would go out in the desert with our grandfather, and he would release the dogs to chase rabbits. And it was, as a kid, it was a great time. And then afterwards, because it's hot out in the desert in Arizona in the summer, we would go to Thrifty and get scoops of ice cream. I can remember we would get a triple, which would almost melt in your hand in the Arizona heat faster than you could eat it. But it sure was fun. And then with grandma, we would watch Price is Right together and try to guess, and do the different showcase showdowns together and that sort of thing. We would go out to eat and things, but we essentially did things with them individually and not much as a group, other than the obligatory Christmas and Thanksgiving holidays. And so I never knew why that relationship was so strained, but it always kind of bothered me why the two of them, which I thought individually are great people, why they weren't aligned, and why that marriage was never really anything that was all that great. And so it was only with this last moments of her life call where she explained that he had doused her dreams. And so she wrapped all that up, and it was a long way. You know how grandmas get into their stories and they go around the block and here and there, but there's gold and wisdom in there. And so what she said was, you need to believe in yourself because I believe in you. And she didn't have much, but she said, I would be willing to even send you what little money I still have to help you. And I can't tell you what that did for me to hear my grandma say, I believe in you. I believe in what you can do, and I am willing to support you in whatever way I can. To kind of think about this, her spouse didn't believe in her. And what does that do to your relationship? People often talk about, oh, the relationship killers in marriages are infidelity. That's number one. And money problems. That's number two. And there's a whole litany of reasons. But man, when your partner doesn't believe in you, that can crush a relationship just as much or maybe even more than those things we talk about more. On the flip side, though, I have been blessed with a spouse who, even when I come up with harebrained ideas, I can see the look in her face. She's like, I'm not sure about that idea, but she'll say, I believe in you. If you think this is a good idea, let's do it. And so what that does for me as a person and what that does in our marriage is invaluable. And here's the other thing. When someone believes in you, you begin to flip that goodness out into the world. It's kind of this pay it forward thing. So all of a sudden, when my kids come with ideas and my daughter says, I'm 19 and I want to go study animals in Africa and work with, big game. And you're thinking, you're 19 and you're going to head around the world to Africa. Sometimes as a parent, our first thing is to pump the brakes, right? But when I think of all these people who supported me, then I think, no, that's not my answer. My answer should be, that sounds awesome. How can I support you? Think about how that changes things. If your spouse or your parent says, wow, what a great idea. Let's do it. How can I be helpful? I can remember our one daughter in her senior year of college, she decided that she wanted to be with her boyfriend who was at the end stages of terminal cancer. And he had kind of one last hope, which was moving across the country to Arizona for some experimental treatment. And she said, I want to go and be with him for whatever time he has left. Now, as a parent, you're thinking, boy, there's all kinds of red flags with this. But that wasn't the time for this. Time was of the essence. This was the time for me to step up and say, I believe in you and I love him. And you know what? If that's what you want to do, how can we be supportive? And one of the cool things was I can remember either my wife or I went out there every 3 weeks to be there with her, to be there with him, to support them in that journey. Now, unfortunately, he passed away. He lost that battle to cancer. But that bond that I have with that daughter, because my wife and I believed in her and supported her, that will last her lifetime. And so those are the things. Just like my grandma, because her spouse didn't believe in her, that impacted her life negatively and undermined her relationship. On the flip side, when someone believes in you and wants the best for you and wants to help you achieve your dreams, that fills your sail. Now, a third thing I want to say is maybe somebody comes to you with an idea that in your heart, you want to support them. You've heard this episode and you're like, yeah, I want to get behind this, but your head is saying, that idea is just half baked. I don't want to see them go out and just flop on their face. Well, here's the thing. Don't be the dream douser. It's not for you to pop the balloon. Plenty of people in the world will do that. If someone has a terrible business idea, the world will very quickly tell them it's hard to monetize this. But that's not your role in your relationship. But here's what I will say. So when my grandma came up with this initial idea in the 40s, we didn't have the level of independent consultants and coaches and people, counselors who could help you vet the idea. But today we do. We have all these people who are third parties who can help you vet the idea. And so don't be afraid to say, wow, I really like that idea. Let's go talk to some other people in the field, or let's go talk to a business consultant or a life coach who can kind of help us refine that. And then you begin to get that idea and not only help them and encourage them, but also make the idea get wings. As we wrap up today's episode about crushing your most important relationships, here are the 3 quick takeaways. First, if you're that person, that dream douser, I'm here to tell you, you are going to kill your most important relationships. And those relationships may be with a partner or a spouse or your kids or your friends. If you're the dream douser, you've got to change your ways. But the second thing is, when you believe and support and encourage others, you're going to start crushing it in your relationships. Other people gravitate to those who believe in you. That is a simple life thing. People want to be around positive, encouraging, supportive people. People want to be around other people who chase dreams. It invigorates everybody in the process. So if you're not that person, be that person. Start crushing your relationships in a good way by helping people chase their dreams and make their life goals a reality. And finally today, if your heart wants to support an idea, but your head says it's foolish or half-baked, get an outside opinion. And not because I've seen this with people. Some people say, oh, I'll get an outside opinion and I'll have this business consultant crush my spouse's stupid idea. That's not what I'm talking about here. I don't want you to take that away in any form or fashion. What I want you to do is go to somebody who's an outside independent party and help get ideas to refine the idea. Okay, maybe the idea isn't perfect now, and maybe the idea doesn't have legs now. But let's work together, you and me, and let's refine this, and let's figure out a way to tweak the dream or bolster the dream so that we can launch it. So that's today's episode, and I want you to go out there and crush your most important relationships in a good way. Thanks for joining me today on the Super Pumped podcast. If you enjoyed today's show as much as I did, I have 3 quick next steps for you. First, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube to make sure you don't miss future episodes. Next, leave me a review in your podcast app and tell your friends about the show so others can find and benefit from the Super Pumped community. And finally, to put the ideas from today's show into action, visit us at superpumped.com to view the show notes, book a complimentary consultation, or take our free business launch readiness assessment. Keep well, and I'll see you next time.